So thanks for coming. Guess you can sort of hear me. So we're going to be talking about what I at least think is a really interesting topic. OpenShift, FICAM, compliance, identity management, DevOps. I think I hit buzzword bingo with the title. But basically we're going to be talking about how automation inside of OpenShift, when it comes specifically to identity management, will both make your lives easier if you're a developer, and your lives easier if you're an auditor, and your lives easier if you're an admin, and will overall lead to a better experience for everyone. Then, of course, it wouldn't be a tech presentation without a demo, so we'll show how all this kind of comes together. So real quick introduction, who am I? Why do I get to talk to you about this stuff? My name is Marc Boorshtein. I have spent 15 plus years in identity management. You name an industry and a product, there's a pretty good chance I've deployed it, implemented it, or had to clean up after it. A few years ago, I started a startup here in the area called Tremolo Security, where we took all of the knowledge gained by myself and my partner in identity management and IT security, and we said, okay, let's try and do this in a little bit of a better way. Let's simplify this. I've also been the architect on multiple ICAM programs, so I'm able to straddle both those commercial and federal worlds. So what are we going to be talking about? So identity management and compliance can often mean different things to different people. Raise your hands if you're a security officer or you work in a security group. None, really. Okay, we got one. Might not want to admit, I guess. And then how many of you are deploying or in the process of deploying OpenShift? Cool. So what started this was there was a great guide by Red Hat's team on FISMA compliance for OpenShift. But when you go through that compliance guide, anything related to identity management, it says someone else's concern, basically. And so this is an attempt to fill in that gap. But it's also going to be talking about how if you take the compliance approach and you apply DevOps to it, not only do you make your auditors happy, but you're also going to go ahead and make you happy as developers and implementers. And then, so in order to do that, we'll talk a little bit about what is compliance. We'll get into some of the technical details about how OpenShift implements identity management, and then we'll go ahead and do a demo. So why is compliance important to you? So this little mathematical equation here, the idea here is basically saying, look, nobody really likes to create accounts, add them to groups, yet we all seem to do it. Whereas if you automate that process, just like automating your pod rollouts, just like automating your deployments, if you automate your user management, you're going to make your lives easier as implementers, you're going to make your auditors happier, and then what you'll also find from a business perspective is that you make it easier for people to use your system securely. You're going to get more people using it. You get more people using it, usually use that as an argument to get more money to fund more implementations. So what is compliance? That's usually I remember when I first started at PwC many moons ago, and somebody said, yeah, we're going to do compliance, and my first question was, compliant with what? Washington, we love our alphabet soup here. So there's really two types of compliance documents. There's the frameworks, so NIST 853, which basically says, define your policy, implement your policy. But it doesn't really tell you what that policy needs to be. And then you get some of the more concrete compliance documents like NIST 863, which is your e-authentication, which level of assurance are you at, and that one is much more prescriptive. You must have multiple factors. It must be cryptographically locked down. You must be able to say that if you're doing multiple single factors, these are the things that you have to go through. So it's a much more prescriptive. And so how does identity management fit into this? Well, let's use an example here. So this is one of the first identity management controls that pops up in NIST 853. And it's a palindrome. Authorized access by valid access authorization. Not really descriptive, but what it's basically saying is you need to have a policy that says, how do you get access? Who approves that access? So that then translates into identity management, because your identity management system should be hosting that workflow for you. So if the example here is, okay, I need to ask my manager to have access for something, that would be a control inside of your NIST 853 document. Ideally, you'd automate that inside of your identity management system. NIST 863, this one seems a lot more straightforward, but is actually much more complex than folks realize. So, and I'm actually referencing 863B, which is the new one that just came out, where they've kind of shuffled up some of the information. But basically, if you're familiar with NIST 863, there are 4 levels of assurance. They've eliminated one of those levels, so 3 and 4 have basically merged. And then they have also added different types of assurance for like federation protocol, so it's a much more flexible standard now. But the short of it is if you come back and somebody says, well, OpenShift, you really need to be privileged, the person needs to have PIV access, what does that mean? These cards here don't contain enough information usually for you to do a real login. The problem with these cards is they have maybe your name, they have a unique identifier that can be used to look you up in AD, but it doesn't know who your manager is, what department you're in, where your location is. So part of NIST 863 is not only validating the certificate on the card. I mean, TLS authentication has been around for what, 20 years plus? But then tying it to a valid data object that has been proofed. So if you authenticate that card and then tell them to put the information in themselves, that ain't LOA 3, because you're not proofing that information. There's nothing on there that says, oh, well, I can tie this credential to the person. So again, this is where identity management comes in, where you say, okay, how do we bind the card to the identity? So let's look at the unhappy path, what this looks like in reality. So user needs access to a project. They email their manager. They say, please give me access to this project. Manager forwards that on to some poor hapless admin, says, I approve. Admin, and this is all if things go perfectly right, admin goes into OpenShift or some other mechanism, manually adds them to the project, sends an email over to whoever asked for it. And if all goes well, the person has the access they need. Likelihood of it all going well, there's a reason why we automate things, right? Now it comes time to get your ATO. Well, okay, auditor wants the approval trail. Hopefully the admin is very good at organizing their email. Otherwise, both the admin and the auditor are going to have a very long night. Nobody's happy in this. The user's not getting the experience that they want. The admin has better things to do. The auditor has a lot of things to do. And there's no way to look at an email chain or to run a report or anything like that. So this is the unhappy path. So what's the happy path? User needs access to something, so they log into a portal. They say, please give me access. A workflow says who the approver is, proves that access. It all gets audited, provisioned, and then when the auditor needs to know who has access, they log in, they look at a report. Notice the only actors involved in this flow are the ones that actually have a business need to be a part of it. The admin himself or herself is not being bugged in order to go ahead and do that. So that's how it should work in the perfect world. So let's talk a little bit about the technology behind OpenShift and how it handles identity management. So I break identity management down into 3 categories: who, what, and why. Who are you? So OpenShift stores everything inside of etcd. OpenShift, of course, is built on top of Kubernetes. Kubernetes stores everything in etcd. etcd is basically an object store. It stores very little information about the user. A unique identifier, maybe an email address, and a descriptive name. That's really all it cares about. You could put other attributes in there if you really wanted to. Only thing OpenShift cares about are those 3 attributes. Now, this is an area where OpenShift's pretty good. If you want to authenticate, you have several options. Probably the two most popular are going to be LDAP and a reverse proxy plus header. So hook it up to your LDAP directory, it does an LDAP query, pulls your information in, you're good to go. No manual work done there. Reverse header plus proxy, very similar. You throw a reverse proxy in front of the OpenShift API server and console, you inject the header. The third one on there, OpenID Connect, is the one we're going to talk about today. So this is the way that OpenShift does what's called identity federation, which means instead of actually asking for your credentials, it's going to trust someone else to pick up those credentials. Now, OpenID Connect is not as popular as SAML 2 from an enterprise perspective when it comes to identity federation. That's changing, but a lot of federal agencies already have SAML 2 implementations, and OpenShift does not support SAML 2. However, pretty much any OpenID Connect identity provider out there, including the one we'll show you today, can bridge that for you. So that one's actually comparatively pretty easy. The what, this is where things get a little more interesting. So what you have access to in OpenShift, if you're talking about at the project level, is a triangulation of 3 points. Your identity of who you are, which is called a subject, a role, which is a grouping of actions and permissions, and a project. Those three things together create a role binding. That role binding is then what is used to authorize you. So in order to be able to, for instance, edit a project, you need to be a member of the editor role on that project, with your subject being part of that binding. Cluster roles are a little different because there's no project, so it's just a combination of your subject and your cluster role. So how do you get that information in there? It's all stored again in etcd. So you have a few different options. One, the OpenShift console. You can manually add users to groups. It's a little cleaner than other methods, but still manually being done. Red Hat provides an LDAP sync tool. The idea being that if you have a group inside of LDAP, you run this tool, it'll synchronize the members of that group into an OpenShift group. Upside to this, get it up and running relatively quickly. Downside, one, it's a CLI tool, so you need to periodically run it. Two, it only does one group at a time. So depending on how you deploy OpenShift, if you have 2, 3, 4 groups per project, 10 projects, 30 projects, 100 projects, you get the idea. You can use OADM or OCAD. OCAD, I think, is the newer command. Or there's web services. I like the web services, and that's what we're going to show today in the demo. Finally, why does someone have that access? Why do I have admin access to that project? How long have I had admin access to that project? Should I still have admin access to that project? Not covered at all by OpenShift. You need some kind of external tool. So we're going to do a demo today. This demo is 100% open source. So you can today go up to GitHub, pull down the source, and start playing with this. It is built on top of OpenUnison, which is our open source identity management project. You can do this with others. And I hope that even if you do decide to go without OpenUnison, this is still all very helpful for you. So the way that we have this set up is we have Origin set up with a project. That project has two pods in it, 2 deployments actually. One is OpenUnison. OpenUnison is you take the main components that you need in identity management, self-service portal, workflow, authentication, smash it all into one project. And then we also have a database to be able to track audit data, manage local users. We're integrated with OpenShift at 2 places. The first is that we use the web services to be able to do the provisioning and deprovisioning, and then also to be able to do dynamic lookups. So instead of writing a workflow for every single project, because that really wouldn't scale too well, we actually pull the information in from OpenShift using the API. So every time there's a new project that comes on board, we immediately know about it. People can start asking for it. And then also from the provisioning side, time to create a user, you're good to go. And then we talk to the database. And then in this demo, we talk to LDAP, could talk to SAML, could talk to another OpenID Connect, could talk to multiple LDAPs, doesn't really matter. This whole thing is self-contained in OpenShift, which is really nice because you're getting the automation of OpenShift. So if I went ahead and killed the pod, OpenShift would say, hey, pod died, time to recreate. So this is all, you're getting all of the automation that you're used to inside of OpenShift. So I'm going to go ahead and start the demo. Oops. All right, so let's go ahead. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log in as a user that has very little access. And what I'm going to show is, here's my PIV card. I'm going to plug it in. And then let's go ahead and log in. Oops. So it's asking me to log in. So what's now happening is I've established the SSL connection. I'm going to log in. You know, this is a common one in pretty much every compliance program. The I shall do no harm or bad things will happen. We actually implement that as an authentication chain. So if I said no, it fails authentication. So there's no way to get around it. So this is our self-service portal. And we're going to go through a couple of steps here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log into the OpenShift console. And we're going to go through the entire process of deploying a project, having someone else get access to that project, seeing the reports, etc. So you can see that my user here, Matt Mosley, I've got a single project I'm an editor on. I'm going to go ahead and log out of OpenShift here real quick. And I'm going to ask for a new project. So what we're actually doing here is we're using our internal workflow engine to automate the project creation process. Not only are we automating the project creation process, we're also automating the creation of authorizations inside of OpenShift and inside of a local database. So once the project's created, you then need someone to authorize access to that project. So everything's happening dynamically. You don't have to have someone to manually go in and create these objects in the various systems in order to track it. So I'm going to say Matt's project 2 for demo. So I've submitted the request, and now when I come back, I want to see a report. I want to see my open requests. And here, you know, this is just some of the data that we're holding. So, you know, who are the people that can actually go out and approve access to this project? So I'm now going to log in as the admin that can approve the access. Now, since I only have one PIV card, I'll log in with username and password on this one. You can see I've got open approvals. And I'm going to go ahead and approve the access. Now, what you'll see here is that I'm going to go to my reports. So this is now the auditor wants to know who's created projects, who approved that access. So let's go ahead and take a look at the changelog for the period. And let's go ahead and pick a couple dates. And now the auditor is actually able to log in and take a look at which projects are being created, what workflow it was associated with, all without calling the project admins. This is the DevOpsification, I'm sure somebody's thought up a good word, of the process. So now I'm going to log back in as Matt. So I'm Matt Mosley again, and you'll see here that I now have this Matt's project 2. And if I go to request access, I want to be a project administrator, Matt's project 2 is now there. So we're dynamically loading this stuff. So I'm going to log out and I'm going to log back in as another user. So this user doesn't have access to Matt's project. He's new on my team, so we need to give him access. So again, the idea here is I'm going to ask for the access. And if I go to the reports and I look at my open requests, I know who to call when it hasn't been approved for a couple of days. So now let's go ahead, log back in as our friend Mr. Mosley. And now I have an open approval. Now the groups that are controlling that are all inside the database. So, and they were all created dynamically. So we can also add additional approvers because, you know, you don't want me to be the one approver for a project. And how you do it is totally up to you. So you want to do it by managers, you want to be able to do escalations. You want something that matches your business process. So I'm going to approve the access. And you'll see here it says only for, I'm just a user, I'm just a standard user. And I'm going to log out. So now I'm going to log in as JSolo again. And you're going to see a few things have happened. One, when I go to check out my, my roles, you'll see here that I now have a role inside of OpenShift called an editor on Marc's project too. Oops, I didn't want to do that. And when I go into the OpenShift console, I'm Jason Solo, and there you can see Matt's project too. And I can start going to town. Now, here's the other side of this that's really super important that people always forget. Deprovisioning. Especially when it comes to compliance, you've got to be able to turn off access. So let's go through what that would look like. So there are different ways you could do this. In the ideal identity management world, you would get some kind of feed or something. For the demo, what I did was I wanted to set up kind of a simple way to do it. So I just, I've talked to Jason, we've decided that this isn't the best place for him and he's going to another project. So I need to deprovision his access. So I'm going to go into request access, my project, and we have the ability to request for other people. 12.domain.com and do a pre-approval. So I'm going to say denied. Leaving. Now the idea here is that the way our workflow is designed, if you're approved, we add you. If you're denied, we remove you. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that request. And let's go to, I actually don't have access to the auditor reports. Oops. Nope. So let me go ahead and log in first as Jason Solo. Apparently I didn't appease the gods. Huh?
You were just in as him.
Yeah, let me go to log in. I know what I did. Oop. Piv. So I'm going to have an, okay. So what happened was, show off some of the product again, I guess. I tried to request a pre-approval as a user that was not authorized to do so. So it's logged that JSolo tried to do something himself, and now it goes to the actual approver. So here I'm going to go ahead and review it, leaving, and I'm going to say, yep, leaving. Deny the request. So at that point, now the user has been removed. Let's log in as JSolo again. I was just seeing if you guys were paying attention. And now you'll see we don't have the access anymore. I go into OpenShift. I don't have that project anymore. And again, where the rubber really hits the road and all this from a compliance standpoint, let's go ahead and log in as somebody with audit capabilities. And let's go to the reports, and we can see that audit reports. And let's go ahead and look at the completed approvals for today. So you'll see here, let's go all the way to the bottom, project administrator was rejected. So, and these reports are all customizable, it's just SQL. The SQL is all documented, so you can use our reporting engine, which is really straightforward. Go ahead and use any BI engine that you have set up as well. So we've got a few minutes for questions.
So assuming we have a process in place already to facilitate access backed by Active Directory security groups, we would run the command line utility just to continually update the impacted groups.
Yep.
Not that I don't like this, but trying to sell it to people who say we already have a process in place for that.
Right. And then the other way that you could go about it is, so you could run the LDAP command inside of a scheduled pod. The other way you could think about maybe doing it is using a just-in-time process. So yeah, so you SSO into your identity provider, and then before SSOing you into the console, where you can then get a token and start working, you would then let the identity provider update your groups inside of OpenShift, so that way you're not constantly running that sync process.
So do you guys have an API for everything we just did?
Yep, this is actually a AngularJS application, and the API is all fully documented, so if you don't want to use our portal, you can use whatever you want.
Do you support JWT?
I'm sorry?
Do you support JWT?
Yes.
No, is it session-based?
Yep, this is session-based, but because the authentication and workflow engine is all one piece, we have multiple ways that you can go ahead and authenticate the RESTful calls. Any other questions? Cool, well, thank you very much.